If you're a guest with us this morning, we welcome you to our service this morning. No, I am not David Duncan. And no, I am not Kent Allen. Brother David is away this morning, and Brother Kent, my understanding, is here in town, but is ill this morning. So I received the call about 7:10 this morning. And I spent about 25 of those minutes driving over here. And so I guess the worst part of it, though, is sitting there waiting to get up. But I'm thankful, and now I understand what Brother M.J. Wallace meant back in the early, mid-'70s into the early '80s, that you always needed to be ready. When I was a teen, we had 3 p.m., 3 in the afternoon on Sundays, we had leadership training classes. And we had assignments from the previous week that we had to study and be prepared to deliver without the Bible. We had to memorize the scriptures. And so if you ever see me up here quoting scripture, a couple of things. It's going to be King James, because that's what we did. And it's because M.J. Wallace demanded that kind of excellence. I was told during my time back at Harding that a sermon, in order to have an effective sermon, then it would take a couple of weeks for you to prepare that sermon, and then you pray over that sermon and allow God the opportunity to work through that sermon. And I thought a lot about that on my way over here this morning. I will say, though, let's be prayerful for Brother Kent Allen, and hopefully he can get to feeling better, and then he can get back home. I have such great admiration and great respect for David Duncan. And I have a great respect for his skill in the craft. And when I got that call this morning, first I was honored, and then I had to have a seat at my table because my legs felt like jelly. But I'm thankful for the opportunity, and I can say this, and that is that I love God, I love His work, and I love His Word, and I love His church. And I'd like to think that I would be ready. A couple of times this has happened to me. Early in my career, I worked in one of our satellite terminals in southern Arkansas, down Prescott. It's Prescott where I'm from, but there in southern Arkansas, they call it Prescott. So I was there in Prescott, Arkansas, and anytime I travel, I try to go to church, and it was Wednesday night. So this particular Wednesday night, I showed up at church, and we had the Bible class, and at the end of Bible class, you would always extend the invitation. So one of the brothers walked back, my first time ever in the city, let alone in the church, and he said, "Sir, will you give our invitation tonight?" So that happened to me that one time in Prescott. Zenny was with me the next time it happened. We were up at Buffalo Gap, Texas. Buffalo Gap, Texas. I don't know if it's north of Abilene, but it's above Abilene. It's up in in Abilene, I guess you'd call it a mountain. But showed up there on Sunday morning, and I learned that morning when we arrived that you're on. I'd like to think that with some experience, I'd be ready. There's a story told, and I understand that it was a true story from back in the 1800s, around 1859. Charles Blunden. But the story was told that he tied a rope on either side of the Niagara Falls, and that he would tightrope across the Niagara Falls. The story I heard back when I was a student at Harding University was like this. There was a man there who had about 200 pounds of dirt in the wheelbarrow. And he would walk across the Niagara Falls with this dirt from one side to the other. And after a while, a crowd had gathered on the border. And they were cheering. And the man made his way back across. He dumped the dirt out. And he asked the crowd, who in this crowd believe that I can push a man across in the wheelbarrow? And one man, very excited, back in the back of the crowd, stood up waving his hand. And then the man with the wheelbarrow said, get in. And that man left with a cloud of dust behind him. I feel like the man in the wheelbarrow this morning. And make no mistake about it, that if we're ever going to be what God calls us to be as Christians, we must understand that we have to be more than just believing in God. We have to do more than just believing in His church. We have to do more than believing in the mission of the church. We must be willing to crawl in the wheelbarrow and allow God to take us beyond our talents and beyond our sight and beyond our own strength. We have to be willing to go all in the wheelbarrow. And I think about Brother M.J. Wallace and my parents and all of those men that poured themselves into us as teenagers to make us ready to be in service for God. You see, if we're going to work for God, then we have to understand that our faith in God to do more with us than we can on our own is a fundamental principle in being a Christian. My text this morning will be from Matthew chapter 22. And there in Matthew chapter 22, starting around verse number 15, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, their goal was to trip Jesus up. That was their primary goal. And I'll be reading here from Matthew 22. I will lift our lesson this morning from down at verse number 34, but I'm going to get a running start here just to identify what it is that they were about. Verse number 15 says, then the Pharisees went out and laid plans to trap him in his words. They sent their disciples to him along with the Herodians. Teacher, they said, we know you are a man of integrity and that you teach the way of God in accordance with the truth. You aren't swayed by men because you pay no attention to who they are. Tell us then, what is your opinion? Is it right to pay taxes to Caesar or not? And their goal was just to have Jesus say something different than tradition. But Jesus, knowing their evil intent, said, you hypocrites, why are you trying to trap me? Show me the coin you're using to pay the tax. They brought him a denarius, and he asked them, whose portrait is this? And whose inscription? Caesar, they replied. Then he said to them, give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God. When they heard this, they were amazed, so they left him and went away. Next, then, the Sadducees come to Jesus. That same day, the Sadducees, who say there is no resurrection, get that now, came to him with a question about the resurrection. They didn't even believe in it. And I heard some time back that they didn't believe in the resurrection, so that is why they were sad. You see? The Sadducees. They were sad because they didn't believe in the resurrection. They said to him in verse number 24, "Teacher," they said, "Moses told us that if a man dies without having children, his brother must marry his widow and have children for him. Now there were 7 brothers among us. The first one married and died, and since he had no children, he left the wife to his brother. The same thing happened to the second and the third brother, right down to the 7th. Finally, the woman died. Now then, Jesus, at the resurrection that they don't even believe in, at the resurrection, whose wife will she be?" Jesus replied, "You are in error because you do not know the Scriptures or the power of God. At the resurrection, people will neither marry nor be given in marriage. They will be like angels in heaven. But about the resurrection of the dead, have you not read what God said to you? I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. He is not the God of the dead, but of the living." So then, verse number 34 is where I'll lift our lesson today and make a few points, and the lesson will be yours. Hearing that Jesus silenced the Sadducees, the Pharisees got together. One of them, an expert in the law, tested him with this question: "Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law?" Jesus replied, "Love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, and with all of your mind. This is the first and great commandment. And the second is like unto it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and prophets hang on these 2 commandments." As I read this passage, and recently I was reading it, and I think I lift from this passage 3 commandments. I know that Jesus said there's a first and there's a second, but I lift from here a 3rd commandment. And that commandment has to do how it is that I love my brother. Jesus said, "Love thy neighbor as thyself." If I had to have a title for this passage, I would call it Inreach, Outreach, and Upreach. What I want to do this morning is I want to take the 2 commandments here, and I want to invert them if I can have that permission. I didn't say reduce. I'm not going to make the greatest the second greatest. I'm just going to invert them, and I believe the Scripture then will support me in that. Listen to Jesus. Matthew chapter 5 and verse number 23. He says this in fulfilling the law. In fulfilling the law, he says, "Therefore, if you are offering your gift at the altar, and there you remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar first, and go be reconciled to your brother, then come and offer your gift." Jesus is talking about fulfilling the law of relations here. So then, before watch Jesus now, we're talking Inreach, Outreach, and Upreach. Jesus is saying, before I can get my Upreach together to offer my gift to God, then I need to get my outreach with my brother together. Before you offer your gift to God, Upreach, get your outreach, go and be reconciled with your brother. So I will take the second commandment first with the permission of Scripture, because I can't have my upreach together until I have my outreach, and then my outreach, then I have to have some kind of self-reflection with my inreach. Inreach. How is it that I love my neighbor? I love my neighbor, how? Like I love myself. I think Jesus is saying, Daron, recognize self-love. Now you can't get too. I warn you then not to become selfish, but we have to recognize our self-love so that I know how to treat my neighbor. I know how to treat my brother. Let me say it this way. As you're driving and you just got a call and you got a lesson, you think about things for the week and all of these things, and you start jotting it down. This week I had a meeting and I ended up having to go over the ship channel. So this morning as I was driving in here, I was thinking this. If anyone ever say to you that Daron Cathey went over to that ship channel and he jumped over, you be sure you tell the authorities, you find them, and you tell them that Daron didn't do that. Somebody pushed him. And my point is this. I'm not going to do anything to harm Daron Cathey on purpose. I love me. And I think Jesus is saying there, the first commandment is we need to recognize self-love, and then we need to treat our neighbors, we need to treat others, we need to treat our brothers like we treat ourselves. We need to look for the greater good in others like we do for ourselves. I don't spend a lot of time on the Inreach because, we don't want to become narcissists and only looking at ourselves. But we have to recognize that self-love so that we know how to treat others. That's the Inreach. Now then, I'll read again for the outreach. Jesus says, that second command, love your neighbor as yourself. The outreach is a command from God. 1 John chapter 3, and I'll start reading at verse number 11. This is the message you heard from the beginning. We should love one another, the outreach. Verse number 16, 1 John 3:16. This is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for our brother. If anyone has material possession and sees his brother in need, but has no pity on him, how can the love of God be in him? The outreach is what we're talking about. He says, dear children, let us not love with words or tongue, but with actions. We have to show our neighbors our love. And then further with the outreach, verse number 24, those who obey his command to love our neighbors, those who obey his command to love one another, verse number 24. Obey his commands and live in him, and he in them. And this is how we know that he lives in us. We know it by the Spirit he gave us. We know that God lives in us by the way that we treat one another. The outreach. One other passage on outreach, 1 John 4, verse number 20. If anyone says, I love God, yet hate his brother, he's a liar. For anyone who does not love his brother whom he has seen cannot love God whom he has not seen. Let me put that this way. Anyone who says that he has his upreach and he doesn't have his outreach, he's a liar. You have to then love, if you're going to love God, you have to love your neighbor. And when we get that all together, we go back then to Matthew chapter 5. We go back to Matthew chapter 5, and we look at then again verses 23 and 24. Therefore, if you're offering your gift at the altar, and there you remember that your brother has something against you, your outreach is not together. Leave your gift there in front of the altar. First, go and be reconciled. Get your outreach together. Be reconciled to your brother, then come and offer your gift. Recognize your self-love. Get your outreach together. Love others like you love yourself. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. And then I think Jesus says we're now ready to offer our gift to God. We've got our Inreach together. We've identified self-love. We have our outreach. We reconcile with our brother. We show, as John says, we show our love not by word, but we show our love by actions. And once we have got the outreach, we're now ready to offer our gift, our upreach to God. Inreach, outreach, and upreach. I offer an invitation today that if anyone here is struggling then with self-love, self-esteem issues, then our invitation is for you. Come and we'll pray for you, or just make it known to us in the back, or you can come down front and we'll pray with you. We'll pray for you. Matthew 11:28, Jesus says, come to me, and I will give you rest. The invitation is to you if you're struggling with that Inreach recognition of self-love. Then the outreach. If you need to fix it with a brother, I challenge you today. I encourage, I implore you today that if there's an issue, let's get it fixed. Let's get it reconciled. The invitation is also yours. And then the upreach. If you're here today and you need to accept God's great gift in Jesus Christ, if you need to put Jesus on in baptism, then the invitation is also yours. Thank you for your attention this morning, and now I ask that you would stand as we sing the song for invitation. I have